Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I'm a little down in the tone. I can hear it in my own voice. I'm a little bit under the weather today. I'm not sick. We're okay. It's Thursday, July 6, 2017, and we're just recovering from some accidents here at home. Nothing terrible, but as you saw in the Morning Post, if you read the Morning Post, if you didn't, I'll update you on it. We have some hanging wall-mounted, or was wall-mounted anyway, shelving unit above the workspace here, the famous Kagro in the Morning workspace, and it just kind of collapsed out of the wall yesterday, late at night, as I was, I'm trying to wind up and trying to get things packed away so I can get upstairs and get some sleep, and the shelving unit just collapsed down out of the wall. So I'll warn my son here, watch your feet around here. There's some broken glass in this area. I tried to clean everything up, but stay out of that area. I'll sit right in the middle of this area with heavy boots on, because that's what I do, for you, the radio listener. It was weird, I was just sitting here, and I was working too. It could have been a disaster. And the thing, it's an IKEA wall unit. It's kind of heavy, actually. And I was always a little bit worried about it when I put it up there, but we wall mounted it with those drywall mounting screws, the expanding screws, but if I try to mount this thing again, I'm gonna have to get one of those bigger, heavier duty things. And we checked the weight of everything that was on there. I weighed the unit. I used the right kind of mounting screws to hold twice the weight that we were putting up there. And it lasted a couple of years, so I guess it's fine. For right now, it will hold 100, 200 pounds. I'm not saying we'll hold it forever. I'm just saying for right now, if you put these screws in the wall, I guess it's good. And then 3-4 years down the road, the thing just collapsed. It had the potential for real disaster. I mean, it's a big-ish thing. It's heavy. It had a lot of good stuff on it, too. Nice knickknacks, things we had collected along the way, and some more expensive items that I had from my grandfather and everything. Luckily, nothing serious smashed. It was a little bit of glass breakage. Nothing terrible, and the best stuff that I really, was most worried about survived, and including all of the computer equipment right beneath it. I mean, it collapsed. It's pretty much nightmarish. You're sitting there, and I heard some kind of noise, and I looked up, and I was like, would that noise come from the, oh my God, and then this thing just comes falling out of the wall. I stuck my hands out to try to stop it somehow, although how you would stop it, I have no idea. And I think I deflected it from hitting. I slowed down some of the things from hitting the ground and kept most of the stuff contained to the desk so it didn't smash. Only things that broke were the things that reached the ground. So I guess I did something there. But the potential for disaster could have fallen straight on top of all the computer equipment and smashed it all. And it sort of dodged it all. It's a little scuffed up. Everything seems to be working. And wow, what a morning. And it shook me up good. And then I stayed up even later, cleaning up and trying to make sure that the glass was cleaned up, and I put these other things away, and it was just, so I'm up till like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I got up this morning and everything's out of place, and it's just a rough day. But at least I'm not the President of the United States and a total moron abroad in Europe trying to make my way through my first G20 meeting, so at least I've got that going for me, which is nice. Let's see. Well, let's make sure, is my Skype working? Yeah, okay, it is, and I've got as long as that's working, we should be okay, because Greg will get us on track with the news. We'll get up to speed on what's happening. The president is abroad and screaming about fake news, and I think already bragging about his electoral college victory. He's making a speech in Poland, which is probably twice over a bad idea. And by the way, there's some excerpts of the speech. I haven't listened to them, but I've seen that they've been circulating. And it's just exactly what you would expect, minus the few things. I thought he would probably throw in some references to Polish jokes, but I'm not certain that I'm not certain that he knows they're jokes either. I guess there's that, but I believe he covered the World War II period with Poland by saying, and how about that time you were divided by Stalin and Hitler? That was tough, huh? Oh boy. It's like you might as well throw in, And how about that decision to put the screen doors on the submarines? No one likes that. I think he might believe those are true. Anyway, he's tottering around there for the rest of the day, then on the way to Germany for the G20 meeting. We can all look forward to the sure-to-be iconic Ich bin ein Hamburger speech. I'm sure he'll try and pull that one off and see whether he can make it work and whether anybody in Russia besides Putin wants to deal with him. The Poles have bust-in cheering crowds. They seem eager to please Trump, and they know how to do it. They learned from the Saudis. And I guess we'll never forget Poland again. And they'll have done their job there. Whether the rest of the Western world and economically developed world shares their opinion, we'll find out. And, of course, no one told him to avoid the bad optics of a one-on-one sit-down in private with Putin, so he's going ahead with that. Lots of potential for disaster, but let's catch up with the day's headlines with Greg Dworkin, who's presumably not had anything at all collapse on his computers. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. So what happened? Did the sheetrock, did the drywall break?
It really didn't. I'm looking at it. It came out pretty clean out of these holes. I think really the expanding screws don't expand as much as you think. I need to get those ones that really open up into claws.
Because, I was thinking if we used Roman concrete instead of American drywall, maybe this wouldn't happen.
No, certainly not. I would have built it into, first of all, it would have lasted 1,000 years, not just 3.
Yeah, maybe 2,000.
Yeah. I told a lot of people about that story. That concrete story is amazing.
Yeah, well, at the same time,
the cheetah story, but it's
the cheetah story was great too. It just happens to be that it's one of those things that's really interesting. I'm glad so far that Trump wasn't in Europe and said something really stupid, like "Don't bother me with polls. The polls are always wrong." Mr. President, we're talking about a different group of polls here.
I thought he might have
No, polls. They're all crap. All of them.
I thought somebody might have told him Poland was a strip club, and that's why he went.
Yeah, you never know. But there are some. It is amazing. I guess I could start with that. I have a whole bunch of stuff here to choose from.
Don't forget Poland.
But I won't. But here is the President of the United States representing the U.S. on foreign soil, attacking the American free press as fake news, which he did at a press conference with the Polish president.
Well, that's where you would do it.
Right. But, it's amazing that you're overseas doing this.
Oh, right, yeah.
And there's a piece from AP here. Diplomats frustrated, confused by Trump administration. They're just as confused and frustrated as the rest of us. There's a story in, I guess it was the Washington Post, that 1 out of 3 people who live in the D.C. area have protested already.
Okay. Yeah, that's likely true. It's
driving
very
everybody nuts. America's diplomats are struggling to figure out what mission the Trump administration expects them to carry out, and they see the importance of their jobs waning as President Donald Trump seeks drastic cuts to the budgets of the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development. And I don't see how anybody can, even think about making Polish jokes when Trump is in the White House.
It would be, it takes a lot of the air and the wind out of the sails.
Not that it was ever appropriate, but I grew up in an Italian-Polish neighborhood, so, I heard this all the time when I was growing up.
Yes, and cultures around the world have their own jokes too. I understand that at least in Eastern Canada, they make jokes about people from Newfoundland. That's the way we would or used to when we were terrible.
And people in Belarus make fun of the Galicians.
I would think
it's
so.
Just one of these things
Sweden.
That there's always a last guy on the totem pole, right? You have to make fun of.
The Norwegians make fun of the Swedish, as it turns out. I don't know. Cheetahs don't do it because they're so genetically similar.
Skin grafts? How do you know?
That's what I heard. I did a lot of thinking about that cheetah thing.
Well, it's important, It's just one of those things. Anyway, so you have these diplomats frustrated, and they don't know what's going on, and you have Tillerson, who's basically powerless. And it's really kind of scary. This Pew Research Center poll comes out on world affairs. Most G20 countries are more confident in Angela Merkel than Trump. And you know who that includes?
By the way, G100, same.
Yeah. But you know what country that includes?
This one?
The U.S.
Easy enough. Oh, we know him best.
Right? Confidence in Chancellor Angela Merkel is 56, and in Trump, 46.
46 is pretty remarkable for him.
Yeah, it's pretty high that people have confidence. The question is doing the right thing regarding world affairs.
Well, I don't know how he got 46 out of it,
because
but okay.
because people assume that Mattis and Tillerson and McMaster will help him do the right thing.
So that's the answer is I have confidence in them, not him, but okay. People get confused.
Well, sometimes it's incredibly well spelled out. Okay? And let me give you a story there. David Petraeus' damning non-response on Trump's fitness to serve. Okay? So this is, I guess, at the Aspen Ideas Conference. David Ropkoth, who's a foreign affairs specialist, says the exchange. But that's the question. Let me ask you guys directly. Julia Ioffi's addressed it directly. I talked to lots of world leaders, traveled around. I can't tell you in all of my life doing this, it never once came up. The question of whether or not the President of the United States was fit to serve and whether or not the President of the United States was actually mentally ill. And in the course of the past 6 months, it's come up every couple of days from senior leaders around the world. Do you think the President of the United States is fit to serve as President, General Petraeus? Laughter. Thank you. As I used to say in uniform, he says, that sounds like a policy question.
All right.
And look, he says, I think it's immaterial. Again, what I'm focusing on is the team. And there are groans from the audience. And he says, no. And Rothkopf says, give him a chance to explain. And Petraeus says, well, let me explain. Pronouncing yes or no, I don't think that changes a darn thing. What I'm pointing out is that around him, he has a very good team. They've been slightly tested a few times. I think the use of chemical weapons was one of those. And I think they did better than was done the last time when there was an explicit red line already in existence, stated on multiple occasions. Again, I think a lot of the policies that had been pursued so far, look, there's all kinds of discordant stuff. Netanyahu's sitting there and the president saying 1 state, 2 state, whatever. We're back to the 2-state solution. I talk about China. We're back to the one China. Excuse me. It's pronounced China. It's China.
Okay. Yes.
And we actually have strategic dialogue, by the way. I don't think it's all bad that a president of the United States talks to another leader. I believe Henry Kissinger said you should have strategic dialogue with your adversaries. Well, that proves it, right? Because Kissinger said it.
Oh, yeah. Well, sure.
And the article goes on to say, this is a dance that many a Trump defender has been forced into. Arguing that things aren't as bad with Trump as some would have you believe, and then punting when being asked to vouch for Trump personally. The latter is a much more difficult thing to do because it means you're attaching your expertise to Trump's unpredictability and whatever he might do in the future. But it's also important to emphasize just how low a bar this is. The fact that Petraeus can't even say that Trump is a fit commander-in-chief speaks volumes.
Yes.
And Petraeus seems to be going out of his way on the panel to argue U.S. foreign policy and national security are on the right path and don't get bogged down in Trump's discordant tweets.
He's not even really arguing that. But even so, it's tough for an ex-general. That's not a good idea. Generals are trained, of course, while they're in uniform, not to do something like that. You can't.
That's a policy question.
Right. Now, of course, once they're out of uniform, they're free to do it, but it's really never a particularly good idea. I don't think, and in another country, if this were a third world banana republic,
well, this is
it would be a bad idea
article.
for
So what he goes on to say is even in these comments, the argument from Petraeus seemed to be that Trump himself could only do so much damage and the people around him would keep him in check.
That's not the point of the presidency.
Right. And then he was offered the chance to come out and say what he really meant, and his non-response spoke volumes.
Okay. That is fair. By the way, aren't all conferences ideas conferences?
Sometimes.
Okay. Just check.
Sometimes it's, I'm here to tell you what I think, and I really don't care what you think, so sit down and don't get to the microphone and give me a whole statement disguised as a question, because I already had this argument with you backstage, so sit down and shut up conference.
Well, then that's not a conference, but it's still about ideas.
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay. Well, it sounds good anyway.
I suppose. Eric Geller says, Trump, the ISIS plan is delayed. You know why? It's the same as Obama's, and they don't want to admit it.
Oh, well, then it's ahead of schedule.
There's an article here in the Daily Beast. The White House has asked defense officials to come up with new ideas to help brand the Trump campaign as different from its predecessor. See, the problem is the predecessor campaign is actually pretty successful.
So you're using it because
Mosul and Raqqa, they're doing what needs to be done. And Trump wants to make it clear that it's only because it's his new, completely different policy.
Yeah. Well, that's running government like a business for you.
Right.
We didn't change the policy, but we did put new and improved on the cover, on the box.
I branded it, yeah.
Yeah. So
it's now Trump policy.
There you go.
It's got big gold gilt letters on it. So everything's different. I sent you a PDF because it's behind a paywall. But this is from Financial Times. The PDF is actually right there on the Skype list. You can find it and open it up.
Like up high or down low?
It's called Russia Born Dealmaker.
Yeah, I see it.
Linked to Trump.
Oh,
assists laundering probe.
Okay.
Felix Sater, who worked on the Trump Soho, turns against Kazakh former business partners. This can turn out to be a big deal.
Yeah, Felix Sater is a big deal to us. We know about that guy.
Yeah, he's got organized crime connections, worked on property ventures, including Trump Soho in Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And it looks like he's flipping. He's agreed to cooperate.
That does bring something else to mind. He's cooperated in the past, and that's his cooperation with our law enforcement community here in the United States in the past is what has left him free to practice this corruption in the past. So I'm not certain. He's certainly thinks. I'm sure he thinks he's playing us, and he might be because it's the Trump administration's Justice Department now. But okay.
Well, this is actually an international investigation into the alleged money laundering network that's in Kazakhstan. So it's not just the Justice Department.
Well, I don't know what to tell you about the efficacy of Kazakh Justice Department, but it can't be worse than ours.
Civil cases across 3 continents.
Could it?
And Mr. Sater declined to comment.
See? All right. Well, he's cooperating with them. I'm not cooperating with you. I'm cooperating with them. I'm not going to comment. That's big news.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's a whole bunch of stuff under the radar while we, pay attention to whether or not Trump is going to, remember, he's overseas and he's going to read a speech that somebody wrote for him. And everybody's going to say, oh, my God, what a speech. That was presidential. This is the long-awaited pivot where he becomes president. Because people just do that. I don't know why, after all this time, people do that. He's still the same incompetent schlub in the White House. And we have incredibly dangerous situations now in North Korea and even Syria. No, he's not presidential. But, we're going to have to put up with that while he's there.
I believe I saw mentioned yesterday that Stephen Miller has written the speech that he's giving in Poland anyway. So I'm not certain what that's supposed to mean, but he did get a Nazi
the West has
to
be clear, and we have to be resolute, and we have to fight terrorism and the decline of the West if we don't, yada yada yada.
Yes, I did.
And while he does that, the Polish government actually buses people out from the hinterlands to go cheer for him because just like in Saudi Arabia, Trump required a cheering section in order for him to feel comfortable.
Well, he likes cheering. He's the please clap guy. It was also mentioned in the.
He's going to sneak into the UK at night, but he wants Polish cheerleaders bussed in so that they could cheer him.
Okay, well, I'm sure they can arrange for that. And but I did see mentioned in the initial commentary how people were saying it's so odd that you go to one of the former East Bloc capitals to denounce to talk about the decline of the West. But I think the alt-right white supremacist types think of Eastern Europe as West, vis-a-vis Middle Eastern anyway, and everywhere else in the world. They're sold on this very weird, mythical, Viking, Rus, Slavic, white supremacist. It's very interesting that they've sort of rolled them into white supremacist thinking. They've been excluded from that in the past. So maybe we have much more welcoming neo-Nazis in our country than old-line Germany-only Nazis.
Right. I can imagine, right? Trump goes to Poland and he gives this speech and somebody says to him, so Mr. President, what do you think of the Battle of Kosovo in 1448? And how that affected the entire history of Constantinople.
I would expound on that.
That's exactly my reaction.
I'm following 1438. Should I Google that? It might not matter.
Well, it was a big deal then.
I guess so. Well, I'm a big deal in Kosovo, really. There was some. So okay, thank you. Oh, you've given me the Wikipedia link to it. Let's take a look at that. Kosovo. They got a lot of battles going on in Kosovo. It must have been tough.
It was the second one.
Boy, that Hitler and Stalin, that was tough. Did you see that clip? I haven't seen it.
And probably Trump said, no, never mind that. What about the first one?
Mm-hmm. Oh, could be.
Because that's what you say when you try to sound intelligent when you have no idea what you're talking about.
Right. Well, you should probably figure that everywhere in Europe has had at least 2 battles in it.
Right.
What did we learn about this? It was a 3-day battle with the Ottoman.
The Ottoman army, under the command of Sultan Murad II, defeated the Crusader army.
Speaking of Ottomans, I should take you furniture shopping because you would not believe what I could show you.
Right. The main thing here is the battle ended any hopes of saving Constantinople from the Ottoman Empire. The Hungarian kingdom no longer had the military and financial resources to mount an offensive against the Ottomans. And with the end of the half-century-long Crusader threat to the European frontier, Murad's son was undisturbed when he conquered Constantinople in 1453. And, it was like a big deal.
Yes, apparently.
So I'm sure Trump would say, yeah, well, what about the first one? What about the third and the fifth and the seventh? Huh? Right. How about those, huh? You never talk about those.
What does he think Kosovo, I wonder where he thinks Kosovo is.
You know what he's going to say? He's going to say fake news.
Yeah, he's saying that a lot already in Poland.
Right.
And,
hey, you know who else said fake news?
That. Who? Well, I don't know.
Well, it was Chris Kobach.
Oh, yeah, I know that guy.
Yeah, he said fake news.
He did? What was he talking about?
What was he talking about? It's always hard to know what he was talking about. Why almost every state is partially or fully rebuffing Trump's election commission. The Trump administration has bristled at some of the recent criticism and media coverage. In a statement Wednesday, Kobach assailed media reports describing states as refusing to hand over data, calling that more fake news.
I see. Okay, so he thinks the reports that 40-something states aren't complying is fake.
Right. He says, no, they're really all complying. Actually, they're really not. There's more than 40 states that won't.
That's a weird thing.
And some of them have told
claim.
him to jump into the Gulf, and others have said jump into Michigan Lake, that sort of thing. So it's not likely to change his core supporters. They always have to throw that in. We don't care. His core supporters are not going to change ever. We don't care. They are not the issue. They have never been the issue. It's everybody else. But an interesting piece here from James Hohman, who writes interesting stuff. The Daily 202, a reminder, 202 is the Washington area code.
That's right. That was a surprise to you, as it turns out. Well, you're not here.
I didn't know that. I don't live in Washington.
It's so insidery. And you know what? There's your huge Beltway bubble mistake. You call your newsletter the Daily 202, and 90% of the country says, I don't know.
Well, I don't know what that, but James Hohman was very kind. He told me what it meant.
And we're all sitting here like, what do you mean you don't know what 202 is? Because we're here, we know it, but...
Yeah, well, I don't, because that's not what it is here.
Right.
The Daily 202, principled conservatives show federalism is more than a talking point by rejecting voter data requests.
That's right. States' rights.
Okay, so what's today's lesson in the Constitution? The 10th Amendment.
No, that's the
worst. We talk about the second, we talk about the first. This is the 10th.
Okay, yeah. Is it? I don't know. You know what? Nobody knows what's in the 10th. The 10th Amendment gets waved around a lot, and I like to think of it as a throwaway amendment. I think that they really thought that it would make sense to have a package of 10.
Well, it basically says any power that's not given to the feds is given to the people of the states, right? That's basically what the 10th Amendment is.
Yeah, it does say that, and it's a weird, genesis because I don't know. I mean, a lot of the constitutional theory would have held that it's not really your prerogative as whatever you are. The Constitution, aren't in charge of telling me what rights are retained by other sovereign entities.
Well, it comes up with this Kobach thing. So
yes,
the big idea, the 10th Amendment is like the budget deficit. You only learn which Republicans really care about it when their own party controls the federal government.
I guess.
When Obama was in charge, it was easy for GOP officials of all stripes to talk up states' rights and decry out-of-control spending. Less than 6 months into Trump's tenure, much of that concern has fallen by the wayside. Each day brings fresh examples of rank hypocrisy. Not just hypocrisy, but rank hypocrisy.
Yes, high-ranking hypocrisy.
Yeah, high-ranking, right? But there are also principled conservative politicians who are proving they follow the same moral compass whether Republicans are in power or in the wilderness. The past week has brought a career-defining litmus test for secretaries of state in capitals across the country by refusing to participate in the fishing expedition of a panel that was created by Trump to bolster his absurd claim. And notice how they frame this. They're not justifying it. To bolster his absurd claim that he won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally, several Republicans in ruby red states are demonstrating a politically courageous commitment to federalism. That's a fair way to put it, right? They don't dignify the Kobach Commission as being legitimate in any way. They're just talking about the results here.
Okay.
That's how it should be done all the time by everybody.
Yes. Well, I certainly agree with the critique. Where was this? It's in your list, I'm sure.
Yeah, the list is like 18 things long, so let me put it at the bottom.
But you can tell me, you can tell me again, remind me where it is, I'll dig it up. But
it's right at the bottom.
Okay, well now that's...
Right below the battle of, that's the second battle of Kosovo.
Okay, so this is the third...
This is the third battle.
Okay, James Homan, huh? Okay.
Yeah, I read him every day. I think he's really good.
I agree with the conclusion about what you should be doing about the commission, but
Well, see, his point is that the reason this is going to fail is pushback from the right more than anything else, which is to say there's so many red states that refuse to participate that Kobach doesn't even have the gloss of saying that, it's the Democrats because they're afraid of voter fraud.
Yes, that's good. And
that's
I like that.
That's really his point, and I think he's right.
Well, then we'll take that point. I will say I think I can contain this to one sentence. Republicans and conservatives will say that they refuse on 10th Amendment grounds. And probably a real Supreme Court justice that knows that to keep the Constitution out of it if you can, would just say it's just a plain old regular jurisdictional problem. There's no authority for them to make this request. There's authority to form the commission, but it doesn't mean that they get to just ask for whatever information they want. There's plenty of non-constitutional ground for saying, I'm just not going to comply with what you want. Democrats could cling to that. Republicans will cling to their 10th Amendment thing, which I have long thought, I can't keep it in one sentence, which I've long thought was a bogus interpretation of the amendment and its meaning anyway, but they'll use this as an example. If you were opposed to this overreaching, overbroad mandate of this commission, we resisted it, and the reason we resisted it is 10th Amendment, and then everyone will come away with a glowing interpretation, the Republican interpretation of the 10th Amendment, and I don't think it even bears on this. So anyway, I'm in the minority.
They themselves don't specifically mention the 10th Amendment. They simply say overreach.
Okay. Well, then Homan don't do their work for them.
I deny the Obama Justice Department's request, and I'm denying President Trump's commission's request because they're both politically motivated, Louisiana Secretary of State Tom Shedler said in a statement. The release of private information creates a tremendous breach of trust with voters who've worked hard to protect themselves against identity fraud.
True.
So it ain't happening. It's not sitting well with me, said Wyoming Secretary of State Ed Murray. These are all Republicans. Mm-hmm. He told the Casper Star Tribune that he will not turn over any voting data. Elections are the responsibility of states. I'm wondering if this request could lead to federal overreach.
It can.
But he didn't say
that. It did. And as a matter of fact, there's also an opinion out there today about that the commission's request is a violation of federal law, or at least two federal laws, in case you were wondering.
Right.
But we'll cover that either later, unless that's on your list.
No. Arizona Secretary of State Michelle Reagan. I was covering the politics of it, not the law.
Okay.
Arizona Secretary of State Michelle Reagan called the commission a hastily organized experiment. The bluntest statement came from Mississippi Secretary of State Delbert Hosemann. Setting the tone for his counterparts, he announced before the commission's letter even arrived at his office he wouldn't comply. They can go jump into the Gulf of Mexico. Mississippi residents should celebrate Independence Day and our state's right to protect the privacy of our citizens by conducting our own electoral processes. Other Republicans have also declined to share information, but without such rhetorical flourishes from Tennessee to South Dakota to Arkansas.
It's very interesting, and it poses a lot of problems, and it's a great opportunity to campaign for higher office. That guy in his proposal can go jump in the local body of water recognized by the registered voters of my state as most important to us. Hey, whatever it is.
Then there's another 24 states that'll give partial information. And partial responses from the states could lead to further problems, experts say, because the commission could ultimately assemble disparate and incomplete information in an effort to draw a national picture. The partial data can make it all largely worthless or misleading. For example, let's just say they only give you the first name.
That would be great.
It's an example of partial information and how it could mislead you. Well, this one says that John lives in 9 separate counties. How could that be?
Yeah. Even if they got all the information, they would
better strike John
mistakes
from any voting in the future, because otherwise it's fraud.
Yes. And that's how they're operating within the states. I mean, the states are no great champions of doing this right. That should be pointed out, including the Republican states that are resisting this. And they may just be saying, hold on a minute, I want to be able to claim credit from this state's Republicans for suppressing Democratic votes. Not you. I'm not going to help you do that. I want to run for governor. So there's always that. But right. Supposing they're being honorable about it, yes, it's an enormous problem. Handing any data that you need kept secure to Chris Kobach is a problem. The first thing he did on the national stage was accidentally reveal confidential information by getting photographed with his memo on the outside of his portfolio.
Right, I remember that.
So, I mean, there's a problem in this administration with that.
So he goes on to say, Homan does, whether you substantively agree with these guys is besides the point. They're demonstrating ideological consistency in an era of rampant tribalism when many Republican politicians keep their finger to the wind and contort their positions like pretzels to match whatever Sean Hannity is saying on Fox News. It takes pluck, especially because the president, who remains overwhelmingly popular with the Republican base, has been lashing out at them on Twitter. And here's a tweet from Trump. Numerous states are refusing to give information to the very distinguished voter fraud panel. What are they trying to hide? Trump carried Louisiana by 20 points, Mississippi by 18 points, Wyoming by 46 points, and Arizona by 4 points. Nonetheless, these Republican Secretary of States have persisted. I like the way they snuck that in there.
Yes.
Cute, eh?
Yes.
It's not without risk, he points out. And Democrats appear largely unified in opposition, but under mounting scrutiny, even some members of Trump's own 50-member panel are now balking.
Yes.
Okay, these are members of the panel. Maine won't release information. Maryland's Deputy Secretary of State resigned from the panel.
Yes.
Indiana Secretary of State Connie Lawson from Pence's home state announced she will withhold most of the information.
Pence
and
is
Kobach,
the chair,
of course, is withholding information from himself.
Yes, he's the co-chair. And all this. I heard the reference to bananas yesterday. He's probably written a letter to himself denying the data that he's seeking.
Right.
So hoping to find that letter. But yeah, I don't know if it's not without risk. I think it is largely without risk.
Because you're going to get attacked. Yeah, we know that. I mean, just look and see what's happening with Dean Heller and opposing the health care bill that Republicans are pushing. You know, he's certainly taking some heat back in Nevada. Of course, he's getting, like all the other Republicans that are opposing it, getting some praise as well. But it's not without risk. I think that's a fair statement.
Okay. I mean, I'm certain I can find some risk. It's as low risk as any play I can think of, especially now. Like, I guess this is the same dynamic as the health care bill not failing with 49 votes. Now that lots of people are jumping off the train, everybody's going to jump off the train.
Maybe, but let's look at it in a different way. There's a whole different dynamic in state and local level than there is at national level.
True.
The pressures
to me,
are different.
That lowers the risk. I mean, who cares what the Secretary of State's doing?
But the ability to fight back and the desire to fight back is also different.
Yes. I don't know what that means. I mean, it is different.
You know, if you're local, all politics is local. So if you happen to live in a blood red state, it's going to be difficult for you to say, well, Trump is wrong, and so I'm not doing something. And I think that that's fair, to call them out and say this is a good thing for you to say something like that.
It's a good thing for them to say. And it's an interesting topic. I'm glad that the column was written because it gives me plenty to critique.
Sure.
How about that?
And the other side of the coin.
Yes.
Is that the Fed's ability to attack everybody locally at the same time is somewhat limited.
Yes, and that's good. And I would think that for Republican Secretary of State, if they find for whatever, first of all, if anybody in their state can figure out who the Secretary of State is, okay, the risk begins. And if they're finding that they're getting heat from people that say, I love Donald Trump, and Donald Trump appointed Chris Kobach to this commission, and this commission made the request, and so therefore I love this request. Why aren't you replying? They can say they might be able to win 50 to 75% of those people back simply by saying, it's not that I don't love voter suppression, it's that I would like to do it here in state where I know who to suppress better than they would in Washington, D.C. anyway. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Well, as long as you're on board with the goal of suppressing the votes, I can't object to having it done here with local workers doing the suppressing rather than sending it to a centralized bureaucracy.
Well, don't get me wrong. My comments ain't a endorsement of Republican rule.
Right.
But I do like the idea of having some principled people who actually, a lot of them are career officials.
That would be a great idea.
Who just want to do it right.
Okay. Well, we can certainly pick it apart. The big point is, the big boss guy said, I want XYZ, and he didn't get it, and that's not a win, and so therefore lose.
Right.
And that's really about all the attention that anybody really is going to give to it, and I'll take it.
Well, I'll give you one more piece of attention in a very tangentially related
I'm
piece
already
here.
wrong. Okay.
From McClatchy called Angered by Trump, Liberals are transforming city politics.
Oh.
The liberal resistance to President Donald Trump hasn't managed to capture any new congressional seats, but it's having a major effect on politics at a more local level. In Jackson, Mississippi, progressives elected a candidate last month who promised to make his deep south town the most radical city on the planet. In Cincinnati, a liberal favorite earned more support than the incumbent mayor in the first round of voting this spring. And in Philadelphia, a Black Lives Matter advocate, I wonder who that is, won the Democratic primary in May to be the next district attorney in a city where even Democratic law enforcement officials have traditionally taken a hard line.
Well,
we have a president who any sentient person recognizes as a wannabe dictator, said Larry Krasner, who won the Democratic Party primary for DA in Philadelphia.
Okay.
That's who it is, Larry Krasner.
Now we know.
That's the kind of thing that can wake you up in the morning, make you lace up your shoes and go vote. So yeah, I think that had an impact. Indeed, it says McClatchy. McClatchy is a really interesting service that I don't think we give them enough play to because they write interesting things.
We don't know what the hell they are, who they serve.
I know,
who is your
like
master?
Alex Orty,
But they're very good.
Political columnists. They're very good. They were one of the first and only to actually call out the W on the war.
Yes.
Back in the day. Indeed, while Trump's election had whipped progressives into a frenzy. Are you in a frenzy? Have you been whipped?
I've been whipped.
And driven new activists and big dollars into high-profile federal races for the House and Senate. It's in cities and towns that the vociferous response against the president is transforming politics. And about time, I might add. It's about time the Democrats went local. That's how you build your bench. The effect has major implications for the Democratic Party, both in an agenda it pushes and its electoral bench of future candidates for higher office. How do you like that? They said the same thing I did. Krasner is the crown jewel of liberal success in local elections this year, winning a competitive multi-candidate primary in a city where the winners of Democratic primaries almost always win the general election. The civil rights attorney, an open critic of the city's police who's closely aligned with the Black Lives Matter movement, is on track to take office just 8 years after the retirement of former DA Lynn Abraham, who over the course of nearly 2 decades in office earned the moniker Queen of Death for the frequency which she sought the death penalty.
Wow.
Then they talk about Cincinnati, Jackson, Mississippi. And in the age of Trump, the political power of bold progressive visions has increased substantially, said Joe Dinkin, spokesman for the unabashedly liberal Working Families Party.
Ah, we know those guys.
We do. They often vote, in New York, where there are fusion tickets where you're allowed to have a second line but run on both. For a long time when I was growing up, it was the liberal line along with the Democrats and the Conservative Party along with the Republicans. But now it's a Working Families Party. And they often help people like Andrew Cuomo win if they get the nomination there. So it's an important group. Anyway, so just wanted to remind people there's that. And then there's this. I'm doing this so you don't get too depressed about the state of affairs in the world and in the United States. This is Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball. University of Virginia Center for Politics. You're familiar with Virginia?
Yes.
You've heard of it?
And the politics.
A generic ballot model gives Democrats early advantage in the battle for control of the House. And what I'm doing is as I read these articles, I had so many today, my list is a mess, so I'm just putting it at the bottom of the list. I give dates so you can find it easy. And what it says here is that if you do a regression model and do all the math, here's Table 2, predicted change in Republican House seats by generic ballot polling. If the Republicans are up by 4 in the generic ballot, they're expected to only lose about 9 seats because the party out of power generally wins in a off-year election.
Okay. Are we talking about the U.S. House then? Not the Virginia House of Delegates. Okay.
Okay. Republican ballot margin 2, you'd expect the Republicans to lose 12. If it's even, they should lose 16. If they're down by 4, if the Democrats have a 4-point lead in the generic ballot, the predicted Republican seat loss is 23. And if it's down by 6, it's predicted to be 27. So the point is, a 5-point generic lead in the ballot is even chance of winning the House back with your 24 seats that you need.
Well,
and if it's 10,
someone has to do this.
Then the Republicans might lose 34 seats.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's
But the results of recent national polls, that number appears well within reach. On average, based on calculations from 538, Democrats hold of a 7-point lead right now.
Okay.
And that's what the Real Clear Politics average says, too. So that would give them about 28, 29 seats.
Yeah. According to this chart, I mean, it doesn't always adhere to the chart, but I guess this is based on historical
the idea
data.
that the House is out of reach is ridiculous. It's well within reach, given current numbers.
Okay. Well, that's good. And
so cheer up.
It's an interesting chart. I'm glad somebody did that. There had to be that data out there. It has to be based on historical results and everything, but I mean, it's out there. You could compile it as good use of your time, Larry. I call him Larry.
All right. Good piece by Joanne Keenan today, turning to a little bit more about healthcare. GOP promises lower health premiums, but ignores all that's driving them. So all they talk about is premiums. They forget to talk about deductibles and what we call OOP, out-of-pocket expenses.
Okay.
Because, I thought the premiums were lower. That's because the deductibles are so high, I still can't afford it.
Yeah.
All right. And here's just a fascinating dialogue that Steve Dennis, our intrepid congressional reporter, had with John Cornyn over this.
Okay.
Frequent GOP talking point in Senate hallways, he says. 22 million. I think I have actually a picture of this so that you could read along.
Oh, all right.
That I put in there. Frequent GOP talking point in Senate hallways. 22 million won't be losing health insurance. They'll be choosing to go without.
Choose or lose.
That's what Cornyn tweeted. Not lose, choose. Apparently you believe freedom is optional, Cornyn said. And so they had a dialogue back and forth with a whole bunch of other people where Cornyn's trying to defend this. And Dennis says, the CBO indeed expects some millions will choose to lose their insurance once the mandate tax is repealed. But others will be effectively priced out of the market. And others, particularly poorer older people who want to stay insured, would face far higher premiums to keep the same plan. The CBO says few low-income people would purchase any plan under BCRA, that's the Republican plan in the Senate, because the premiums deductibles would be so high. CBO describes BCRA choice for low-income people, plan with much higher deductible, plan with much higher premium, and predicts few will buy. They also say in some rural parts of the country, there would be periods without any insurers at all under BCRA, and that's even leaving out the fact that a lot of the people who lose insurance would be Medicaid, so they don't really have much of a choice in terms of anything else. So the idea that Cornyn and the Republicans are pushing ain't flying with the public. That's why this thing is so unpopular. But just know that their talking point, their Frank Luntz talking point is going to be, it's about freedom, because if all those people lose their insurance, they chose not to buy.
Right.
I have a $2 million policy, and if you, who's making $14,000 a year, choose not to buy it, that's your choice.
Freedom. That's good. Yeah.
It's an amazing, sell.
That's just
which I don't think is going to work, but I just thought I would bring it to your attention.
Okay, well, at least we know. It'll work with some people for whatever reason, and not so much because they're convinced of its truth as, well, I don't know what else to say, so I'll say that.
Well, Brian Beutler said something. He said, even if this were true, which it's not, he's saying the GOP reforms will create a deregulated market that produces crap plans that nobody wants. And I added, he's also saying clearly it's not our problem.
Okay. Well, there's the invisible hand for you. Everyone knows that the invisible hand of the market is all about producing crap that no one wants.
Yeah, pretty much.
What a weird kind of reform, market reform. So we're going to reform this and make it more free market so that it behaves exactly like the free market so not supposed to.
And I know this is an old story, but I had to bring it up because I just love it so much. So there's a current article from The Hill, GOP tensions rise over Cruz proposal.
Okay, that's not so old.
That's not so old, but the follow-up. Tensions between Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and his old antagonist, Ted Cruz, have reappeared in the high-stakes negotiation over health care reform. Cruz is insisting on a reform for the Senate GOP bill that senior GOP aides say is a non-starter with much, if not most, of the Republican conference. So he's again being a thorn in McConnell's side. Remember, this is a guy who couldn't get sufficient second.
Yes.
He proposed something, and the rest of the Senate just looked at him and said, I don't think so.
Right. That's why it was so surprising the other day when we were talking about there being a Cruz plan. Like, who told Cruz he was eligible to offer something popular or even unpopular at this point?
I would say if we voted on the Cruz proposal, it would be in the neighborhood of 37 to 15 against. That's 37 no votes and 15 yeses, and that's probably generous at a GOP aide familiar with the Senate negotiations. Okay. Nobody wants to go home and say to a 45-year-old steel worker with diabetes, you should have to pay a lot more for your health insurance.
Then why are they all doing that?
Frustrations are mounting with Cruz among Senate negotiators because leaders have felt blindsided by his demand that the legislation essentially eliminate the protection for people with pre-existing conditions. That's the whole thing. He wants to have these two plans, the non-compliant and the compliant plans offered at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. And GOP leaders thought that they had bypassed the whole pre-existing conditions that bogged the House down until Cruz brought it up again, and then Trump signed on, and now they have to deal with it again. So they're really unhappy about the whole thing. So, there's that, and they're very, very unhappy with Cruz about bringing it up. And the old story that I was reminded of is the Al Franken line from his book. Al Franken, Giant of the Senate.
Okay.
And he wrote, here's the thing you have to understand about Ted Cruz. I like Ted Cruz more than most of my other colleagues, and I hate Ted Cruz.
There you go.
I love that line because it's true.
Yeah. I was surprised that he was even getting the time of day in all this, and I'm still surprised hearing you describe it. I mean, I understand the politics of it. That he made this stupid proposal. He probably made it not really even. I don't know whether he's like super clever and thought this is a great backdoor way to eliminate.
Well, it came up originally. It came up back in January, and they decided not to do it then.
Yeah. Then we got months of stories of how McConnell is paying no mind to Trump, and he's driving the process, and he doesn't care what Trump thinks. Trump endorses, because he doesn't read anything, this stupid thing that Ted Cruz proposes. I don't really know why. I mean, what happened to Trump thinking Ted Cruz was worthless?
Well, Mike Lee proposed it, and so Trump signed on it, wasn't it?
Maybe that was. How did it get Cruz's name on it?
Because they both did it together, but Lee was the one that tweeted.
So he should.
So that means that Trump saw it.
Okay. Okay. It's interesting. Here's a side note. Lee comes up with the thing. Lee tweets it. Lee brings it to Trump's attention and gets him to sign on. And then
Cruz
it gets
is the
called
one that's insisting on it, though.
Yeah. So then it gets called the Cruz plan. But it's interesting that Lee doesn't. I don't know. Maybe he has done something to complain about it, and we just haven't seen it. But I don't know. I like the story better if Lee just says, I don't care. The policy is getting attention.
Everything is about Cruz.
Yeah.
On Wednesday, Franken continued to bash Cruz on Sirius XM. This is an old story, but it's still a good one. That Cruz is so unappealing to other senators that they have refused to buy him Secret Santa gifts. I've had people pick out Cruz's name and drop it on the floor, Franken said. I've actually had that happen.
Pretty good.
So, the fact that Cruz endorsed it means he just lost 8 votes right there from the conference.
I was wondering if that would have changed. And I think he had a moment after the election of, at very least, not being Trump and saying, I campaigned, I did pretty well, whatever. I was away for a long time. You guys forgot about me. He could have started over. But
yeah. Here's one last one that Franken said. Franken's just so funny. Because the thing is, this is all true. You basically have a rule that if you have a conversation with somebody and it makes them look bad, it's a private conversation. You don't repeat it. I have to say, Cruz is an exception to my rule.
Just can't stand not to tell these stories.
Right. And then he explains why. He said, I made an exception with him because he broke the rule. He broke the protocol of the Senate. It wasn't quite that rule, but he got up to speak and called Mitch McConnell a liar. Remember that?
Yeah, but
and that was completely against protocol. So I make him an exception. So I don't say bad stuff about my other colleagues. But,
Okay.
He also said Ted doesn't get anything done.
True.
And his big accomplishment was shutting down the government.
Right.
right? Cruz is Cruz is the guy in the office who microwaves fish.
Did he say that?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. He's that kind of guy. He's unpopular. He rubs everybody the wrong way, and he can't stop.
Right. Exactly. So I think that's all of that is important to keep in mind, because you'll hear about CBO getting, different instructions. We talked about this a little bit on Monday. But the fact is that the less people you cover, the cheaper the plan's going to be. But the other side of that coin is the cheaper the plans, that means the less people you're going to cover and less coverage you're going to get. And so I don't see how, I just, at this point in time, regardless of the genius of Mitch McConnell and the maneuvering he's doing, and given all the stuff we talked about on Monday about how the Susan Collins of the world are getting receptions back home.
Yes.
I just don't see this bill going anywhere at the moment.
Well, I certainly hope not. It would be a great, great result and a fantastic strategic win, at least for
Mitch
the time
McConnell,
being.
Because he's such a genius.
Well, for everybody else. Weeks ago.
He's so smart you don't even realize he won when he lost.
Oh, well, that could be.
That's how smart he is.
Maybe. I'll take that. If he was looking for a way out of getting to a vote on this thing, he is a genius.
Now, I think it'll go away and come back. I don't think it's dead. The trouble with the zombie thing is that they're totally committed to doing something. But, it's just really difficult to see how he pulls it together right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm okay with that. And it would be a big win for the people who weeks ago said, hey, is there any way we can procedurally or otherwise push this vote past the July 4th recess so we can have one more week of rallying the troops against it? Yeah, sure, you could do this, you could do that. We never even came to using those tactics that we outlined, but we got the thing pushed back.
Instead, we had Ted Cruz.
Yeah, Ted Cruz did it for us.
Ted Cruz is so much more effective.
Which means that we have this same strategy still in pocket for use later to push it to the other side of the August recess.
Absolutely.
And
with that, I will leave that with you. But I'm Greg Dworkin, speaking with my good friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. I'm glad you weren't hurt by the rise and fall of the IKEA bookshelf.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. In Norway, they would make fun of it because it's Swedish. Yes.
Third Battle of Kosovo.
Right.
But we'll be back. David will be back tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday, and we'll do it again.
Okay. We're forced to do this. We're not.
You got another hour. I hope you figured out during my soliloquy what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, the next hour is why all of the James Hohmann stuff deserves criticism.
Absolutely. Take care, and I'll talk to you.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Take care. Good start for us here. We could probably discuss that for quite a while. I think I made the points clear enough, but I guess one day we could set aside some more time. I wonder if Armando would be interested in joining that discussion about Republican devotion to I don't know. There's a weird Republican, Federalist Society cult of the 10th Amendment that I think gives it an interpretation. No, it shouldn't be surprising to you. I'll put it in more context. We've described pretty clearly the weird Republican conservative cult of the Second Amendment, that is not just devotion to guns, but the reinterpretation in the judiciary of the meaning, origin, and purpose of the Second Amendment. I think they have a similar idea about the 10th Amendment, and it might potentially be even more dangerous one. The 10th Amendment, I don't know. To me, it was sort of a historical dead letter for a long time. But then, I guess if you hold up the 10th Amendment cult against the Second Amendment cult, which I think everybody has a pretty clear idea of how they operated and what they did, and the somewhat more esoteric, but it'll ring bells among the legal community, the Constitution in Exile gang, the people who, the ultra-conservatives who felt certain that the original intent of the founders was departed from during the New Deal, and that we need to return to the Lochner era court. They romanticized their position by referring to it as in a way as the Constitution in exile, that the true Constitution was living in exile as a result of the radical court-led revolution, legislating from the bench among the members of the Supreme Court who were in fact quite conservative and simply looking to preserve. Well, anyway, we talk about the political dynamics of that and the court packing scheme, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea that, like I said, they romanticized the idea and gave it some life by saying that they were really trying to only bring back, to revive the original intent, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the 10th Amendment kind of goes along with it. It's sort of like it had been dormant because it's not used for anything because no one knew what to use it for. And it's overbroad and it's a catch-all and it doesn't really even necessarily belong there. But they've romanticized it to the point that it's going to help us bring back the Constitution from exile, and everybody's been ignoring it. But in fact, it's so vague and so broad it can be used for almost anything. And to the extent that they succeed in popularizing it as a rallying point for conservatives, and then launch it into the wider body politic, some really stupid and dangerous things could end up being justified by an amendment that really has nothing whatsoever to do with the underlying policy they're pushing. That's my big concern. Let's see. Greg has just sent me a link here. We'll take a look. It's the Cruz stuff. White House backs conservative health plan, but GOP leaders are leery. Okay, were we missing that one from our list before? I know you were just reading from it. Maybe it wasn't on the list. Why are all the statues in Statuary Hall of late covered in plastic tarps? Are they repainting in there? I see a lot of them in the background. That's the second time I've seen that in recent weeks. I'm dying to know the answer to that question. But I can move on from that into other things. Okay, let's see. There were a couple other things that came up in passing in some of these. Oh, yes. You know what I wanted to pull out of the other article that you mentioned, Greg? Pardon me, the McClatchy piece, the angered by Trump liberals are transforming city politics. I don't know if you skipped over this because you saw the name come up and said, oh my God, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this thing, but I'll give it a crack. It's important, I think, to try to say the name of the new mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. I raised my eyebrows at the mention early on in your reading of this piece that Jackson, Mississippi, how did you put it? Well, it wasn't you. I guess it was the article that you were reading saying, that progressives elected a candidate last month who promised to make his Deep South town the most radical city on the planet. That seems incongruous with the way we normally, I guess, think of Jackson, Mississippi, if we're thinking of Jackson, Mississippi at all, and I guess maybe we should be. Down a couple paragraphs later, it tells us who is the new mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. Can you believe this one? His name is Chokwe Antar Lumumba, the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, mayor-elect, I guess, is Chokwe Antar Lumumba. And by the way, it says that he has become mayor-elect just 3 years after narrowly losing the mayor's race, I guess, last time around. So, I mean, I guess if you're in Jackson, Mississippi, it comes as no surprise to you. But for the rest of us, it's a surprise, and a pleasant one at that. I would have thought that would be a difficult victory to pull off in Jackson, Mississippi, but apparently not, and maybe I misunderstand the nature of the electorate in Jackson, Mississippi, but it's in Mississippi, and for whatever reason, we up here in Washington, D.C. area, and in a lot of places around the country, think of, and this is a huge mistake, and it's worth bringing up, especially in this context, that is to say the Trump era context, because we tend to write off Mississippi as well. I mean, come on, it's Mississippi. It's going to be deep red. Of course, they're probably all pro-Trump. They're all crazy. We should let them secede. Well, in Jackson, Mississippi, the new mayor, Chokwe Antar Lumumba, would probably have a great deal to say about writing off the entire state because Trump and Trump supporters. And I don't know, it speaks to an awful lot of things, including the story we heard over the last couple of days was it the New York Times, I guess, making yet one more stab at boohoo. Let's talk to people, Trump supporters who feel isolated and excluded in various places. And there was the big story about I guess the rural North Californians who were boohooing about feeling disconnected from their very blue state, and they want to separate, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, we never did get around to the story of discussing at length the fact that the nominal leadership of either the California secession story or the California dividing California politically and seceding, along with perhaps more rural sections of the rest of the Pacific Northwest in some way. And we never really did get around to the discussion that leadership, or the leadership of that movement was weirdly, and now of course it makes much more sense, based in Russia. Interestingly enough, in some cases, American expatriates living in Russia, but by golly, that seems weird. What's your big, what's the grounds for us listening to your beef about California politics from Moscow? There is none. But, of course, I think you all get where I would be going with this. Is he just a Russian paid troll at this point? And he's just doing whatever he can to undermine the biggest source of blue voting and blue votes and electoral votes as well, that there is, California. The best we can do is divide it and undermine what's going on there. I guess so. It's certainly worth considering. Anyway. So, okay, that's it for doubling back to the McClatchy piece. I thought that was really interesting and worth pointing out. And I was going to say, I mean, it relates to this story about people being isolated in their pockets in various states. And I guess if we're going to spend any time taking the suggestion of the New York Times that we boo-hoo about conservatives isolated from their very blue state, lots of people on Twitter took the opportunity to remind us that there are plenty of blue voters who feel plenty isolated in their very red states. And I imagine that the people in and around Jackson, Mississippi would like to remind us that that's the case. And where's my boo-hoo story? And I guess we haven't seen one. Okay. Yes, Mad Hatter, commenting along the way, seems to get the gist of things. This is the way I view it. Conservatives making use of the 10th Amendment is essentially them saying, we don't like this, so 10th Amendment. And that's pretty much the way they've used it for a long time now. Let's see. What other fun things have we got here to explore in Pocket and elsewhere? Oh, you know what? I haven't read this article. So, might as well read it now, because I got nothing else to do. Nothing else is falling off the walls as far as I can tell, so I have my hands free to click on this. My eye was grabbed by the headline and combination of source and headline. 538 doesn't always grab me with their headlines. This time I was grabbed because I thought, well, one, intriguing headline, depending on who's writing it. I mean, I don't know the writer here, but here the source made me do a double take. That 538 would be publishing the story of the headline of what happens if the election was a fraud? The Constitution doesn't say. That's an intriguing piece for 538 to take up. Julia Azari is the writer here, and I thought, hey, let me take a look at that and see what makes it past the 538 editors under that title. Or what title do they lay, who lays that title on the story here? Let's see what's inside. For all the headlines about Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, no hard evidence has come to light, at least publicly, showing that President Trump or his team were involved. Okay. If we take hard evidence to mean direct proof, I guess we'll say that's true. Anyway. Suppose, though, that such evidence did come to light. That's a good question. What would happen if it became clear that Trump or his advisors colluded with the Russians? I think this is a question now on everybody's lips. And it's as important to acknowledge as a common refrain as the importance of David Petraeus not being able to even get around to saying, well, the president is at least minimally competent, and he's got a team around him. We can't even really say that. He talks a lot about the team, true, but he still wouldn't concede. Well, he might be, at least minimally functional, but I guess not. Anyway, if you can ask that question, then certainly it's valid to be asking, well, okay, what if there was the proof we were looking for? What would we do about that? And that's the ultimate question here, right? Suppose we were able to, and it has a lot to do with whether or not you want to put any effort into pursuing these questions. I mean, in the abstract, yeah, everybody's going to want to know whether or not the election was stolen through fraudulent means. But then the next question, of course, is what are you going to do about it? And, of course, lots of people who don't consider questions of process simply say things, well, we'd impeach him, or we'd get rid of him, or we'd undo the election, or we'd have a do-over. And that's a pretty serious question. Exactly what do you do procedurally? Who does what? Who calls for what and under what authority? And who makes the decision about whether or not to do it? There's a lot of things to think about. And really, procedurally, it's such a nightmare. I mean, there's nothing, and here's the whole point. The Constitution says nothing, so you're flying completely blind. There's just nothing out there about what to do if you find out somehow that the election is a total fraud. And we've found those things out on smaller scales before, and judges typically they're the ones making these decisions usually, because people say, what are we going to do? Well, I don't know. We'll go to court. That's what you usually do when you have an otherwise intractable problem. That's all we've got in this country. We go to that, or at least that's the only peaceful thing we've got, and we're afraid of all the rest of the stuff, and rightly so. If the Constitution says nothing, the judges don't want to say anything either. And they very, very rarely, there's only a very, very few cases where even things that don't rise to the level of I won this election by fraud, but that, I broke campaign finance laws. I broke state campaign ethical guidelines, some of which are, codified in law and some not. But, ordinarily they say, well, the only thing we can do here is we'll respect the will of the people in having made their choice, even though they were defrauded in their ability to make that choice rationally, and we'll fine you or fine the campaign. And it's kind of like, okay, in the end, it just ends up being a slap on the wrist and an endorsement of cheating. But very rarely, if ever, have courts said, yeah, we're actually going to hold the election again, or that guy loses his office. It's extraordinarily rare. I have seen things where under certain much stricter than federal law state laws, the courts have stepped in and said, well, we actually, and it's only because they have law on their side. They have black and white, black letter law to point to say, you're out. State law says so. Federal law, there's nothing like that. And generally the answer is, you shrug, maybe you can come up with a fine, and you just say, better luck next time. And it's still worth having brought this case, because now the rest of the world knows this is a way that people cheat, and hopefully, cross your fingers, it won't work again. Not so good for, the results are mixed, let's say, on the federal level. Okay, let me get back to the story here, because there's some organized thoughts, I'm sure. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gotten past the editors in this article. So, what would happen if it became clear that Trump or his advisors colluded with the Russians, or anyone else for that matter? I'm taking the side of Donald Trump suddenly in saying that. This isn't the only type of wrongdoing the investigations could uncover, but it's among the most serious because it would cast doubt on the legitimacy of the 2016 result. So, is there a process for dealing with a finding that in essence invalidates an election? And it's only in essence that it invalidates it. That's the problem. By the way, if you missed the reference, we didn't discuss it fully exactly what Trump had been saying in all cases in Poland. But one of the things that he was asked about was Russian interference, and basically he gave back the answer. He was asked whether it was the case that the Russians and only the Russians had interfered. And he said, we just don't know. Nobody knows. But he did it in a way. He was trying to cast doubt on whether or not even the Russians had interfered. And there's really no doubt left about that one. But, I suppose it's still true to be able to say we don't know for sure that nobody else also tried to interfere in the election. They could have been just crowded out by the Russians owning the whole thing. Anyway, back to the 538 article. When it comes to presidential elections, the answer is not really. The answer to the question being, is there a process for dealing with this? The laws and processes around national elections have grown up in a piecemeal fashion over time, with state and local laws governing the administration of presidential elections. And again, I'm sorry, I have to take a time out just to connect us to a previous story. James Hohmann, you're back on the block again about all of this. There is a federalism argument. I don't know if I still don't necessarily acknowledge it as a 10th Amendment argument, but there's definitely a federalism states' rights type argument against compliance with this, Kobach Commission. And this reminds me of it. And the point is, state and local laws govern the administration of elections, even presidential elections and federal elections. The federal government has an interest in seeing that they're conducted fairly and honestly. Yes, because of course you're electing federal officers, but it's been fairly clear since forever, really, that the states are the ones administering it. The states are the ones sending these delegations, after all, including, when you're talking about electing the president, the delegation to the Electoral College. And with or without the 10th Amendment, the states ought to have every right to say, listen, the administration of these elections was delegated to us. We're not handing our information over to anybody else. We are the ultimate authorities on how those elections are conducted within our boundaries. You can impose other sorts of restrictions on them outside, but it ought to be very difficult from a centralized federal level to change the way elections are done in all the states without our consent. And that's very true. State and local laws govern this stuff. And besides which, in addition to which, I guess I would say, I'll also mention, for instance, specifically on the question of should the voter rolls, should this commission have any right to demand the voter rolls and the information that goes along with it from all of the states? And one other answer should be absolutely not. Well, why not? I mean, we want to make sure that elections for Congress and the presidential election, of course, are conducted fairly and honestly, and we certainly have an interest in that, and the states should all answer yes, but these are our voter rolls. And let me tell you, there are a number of elections that we conduct based on these voter rolls and these eligibility requirements and our own validation process that have nothing whatsoever to do with the federal government. That voter roll, it's the same voter roll that we use to elect our governor, and surely you have no interest, legally speaking, in that. It's the same voter roll that we use to elect our state legislature, to elect our statewide officials of other sorts, secretaries of state, for instance, attorneys general, where they are elected, judges, where they're elected. And it's the same voter rolls in smaller part that we use to conduct our local elections as well. We administer that as a state. We want to do a good job of it. We want to make sure it's all done fairly and honestly, but there's no interest at the federal level. I'm not giving you, you're asking me for my voter roll that I use for my gubernatorial elections, and I'm not going to give that to you. I own that. That's ours, and we administer it. Yes, it's also the same one we use for federal elections. And yes, that creates a contradiction, but it's a contradiction that's solved by the longstanding precedents that it's us, the states, who administer these elections even for federal office. And I think case closed, goodbye, go away. Federal Constitution, not necessary. All right. Anyway, moving on with, once again, back to 538 on this. Yes, state and local laws govern the administration of presidential elections, and the Constitution itself focuses more on ensuring stability than on administering elections. As a result, there aren't clear procedures for how to handle questions of legitimacy after the fact. That's the real problem, especially when those questions involve the presidency. It's pretty tough. Breaking this down requires taking a step back to think about the origins of the Constitution, and the problems it was designed to solve. First off, the American presidency is a kind of a strange office. It combines the duties of a head of state with the duties of a head of government, which is true. Many countries divide those duties, for example, by both having both a president and a prime minister. That's the most frequent in constitutional democracy world. The Constitution, ours anyway, gives the president the power to lead the executive branch, the responsibility to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, and places that person in charge of the military, although Congress retains the power to declare war. After some rocky years under the Articles of Confederation, many, though not all, political leaders were ready to make trade-offs, allowing a more powerful central government that could ensure stability. That actually makes an interesting side point there. Everyone ought to remember that the Constitution was put in place to replace, you remember from school, of course, to replace the Articles of Confederation, and there's lots that's packed into that, too. But one thing we sometimes leave out of it is there's sort of the popular misconception. People forget about the Articles of Confederation, essentially. They forget that they were ever there. They forget that the Constitution was a reaction to that, and they instead think of the Constitution as being of a piece with the Declaration of Independence, which Trump supporters now hate, apparently, according to Twitter, anyway. But they think of them as being as of a piece, and plenty of years passed in between the two of them. In long hindsight, it appears like, well, it's all the Revolutionary Era, right? So both got 17s in the date. So it's really pretty much the same thing, but a lot of time passed in between them, and that's important in dissuading or disabusing, I suppose, people of the false idea that I think that a lot of them have, that the Constitution we set up the Constitution as an alternative to, a direct alternative to, and the embodiment of our rejection of the British system, separating ourselves from Britain, and that's not really true. It's an important part of the dynamics to remind people the Constitution was a reaction to our own first failed experiment in self-government, and not necessarily, it's not like, well, we set up the Constitution to guard against tyranny, and we did, but not British tyranny per se. That was certainly in the back of their minds, of course, because a lot of them had lived through that, but the problems they were solving were the problems we had in our own government, some of which, and some of it was certainly motivated by the desire to stay free of foreign entanglements, yes. The emoluments clause, foreign emoluments clause, for instance, would be one of those things. But we don't care about that one anymore, and we hate it now, so screw it. Anyway, important historical notes. For some rocky years under the Articles of Confederation, some, not all, political leaders were ready to make trade-offs, allowing a more powerful central government that could ensure stability. That was one of the reasons for having a national executive under the new system. The Articles of Confederation didn't have a president, which made it harder to enforce laws, deal with rebellions, and forge national policy out of the demands of different states. Notice no mention of the menace of foreign intrigue or foreign incursion, or the necessity of remaining free from Britain or any of that. That's just didn't really enter into the main motivations, I don't think. There were a lot of considerations when figuring out how to select the right person for that new role. However, the substantial power of the office meant that the president needed to be a person of competence and character. Whoops. Oh well. To be independent from Congress and to be able to represent the nation and not just a few states or population centers. Oh well. Selecting such a person through a direct election was out of the question. It was difficult for many of the founders even to imagine a national election, or that attempting one would achieve the intended goals. However, it would be A-OK if a national body dictated to all of the states how to conduct such a national election, not to connect it too strongly to previous articles and arguments made. So, where were we? Selecting such a person through a direct election out of the question. Difficult for many of the founders to even imagine a national election, or that attempting one would achieve the intended goals. Furthermore, disputed elections are by definition destabilizing. So the Constitution is designed to maximize the chances of a conclusive outcome, particularly for the nation's most powerful office, the presidency. It's actually an interesting argument in favor of the Electoral College. You see, it's made right here. The framers gave the Electoral College broad discretion to resolve disputes as it saw fit. But they've forgotten. Anyway, they decided not to exercise that broad discretion. They all, of course, reported to their state capitals with the understanding that they had zero discretion. But maybe not. I don't know. I mean, I guess you could argue, well, they have broad discretion to resolve disputes, but there's no dispute here. Anyway, moving on. The text of the Constitution pretty much says an election is legitimate when the Electoral College says it is. You could certainly have argued, well, you don't want to open that Pandora's box or can of worms, whatever it is that you hate opening most. You pick it. We don't want to do that because then you're really saying, okay, you can have almost zero control by the electorate over who ends up as president if we get in the habit or even open the door to allowing the Electoral College to show up and just say, screw it, this other guy is president, or somebody you never even thought of is going to be president. Well, there's supposed to be some prohibitions against that in the Constitution, but I guess then might as well throw out the question of what do you do if they say, to hell with that, we say this, who are you going to appeal it to? I don't know. Anyway, the text of the Constitution pretty much says an election is legitimate when the Electoral College says it is. It doesn't lay out a process for do-overs. Occasionally, courts have ordered new elections for offices other than the presidency after a proven case of fraud or error. And there are two links here, or, by the way, a third link, gerrymandering. A court in North Carolina, for instance, ordered new state legislative elections, though this order has been put on hold. So we haven't even seen that one come to fruition. And a Senate election was once redone in New Hampshire because it was too close to determine, even with multiple recounts. So some super specialized situations there. By the way, what are they linking to in terms of proven cases of fraud or error? The fraud, we'll click through for you and give you that service. Let's see. High Court orders new EC election. This is an election in Indiana. Interesting. East Chicago mayoral election from 2004. Just by way of, telling you what that one's about. The error to which they linked is the case of Bauer versus Soto. That is, let's see. Supreme Court of Connecticut in 2006. So maybe Greg knows about that one. What are we talking about here? This Common Council for the City of Middletown. So you could say they have occasionally stepped in and reversed what purported to be election results when there was clear cases of, as they say here, fraud or error, but only on the most, the lowest local level. There's no major city or even certainly no federal elections where these things were overturned, with the exception of, I guess, the New Hampshire thing, and it wasn't overturning the results so much as saying we cannot come to a result. Let's click that one, by the way, and see if we can bring up the history of that. 1975, closest election in Senate history. The United States Senate website has this news. The 1974 New Hampshire race for an open seat that pitted Republican Louis Wyman against Democrat John Durkin led to a contest that lasted 8 months and came down to a margin of victory of just 2 votes. Though Wyman enjoyed a lead during the campaign, the Watergate scandals, and the August 1974 resignation of President Richard Nixon made it a tough year to run as a Republican. On Election Day, Wyman barely won with a margin of just 355 votes. Durkin immediately demanded a recount. The recount shifted the victory to Durkin, but only by 10 votes. Reluctantly, the Republican governor awarded Durkin a provisional certificate of election. This is interesting for other reasons. Now it was Wyman's turn to demand a recount. I'm sorry for this distraction from 538, but it's interesting. The State Ballot Commission tabulated the ballots in dispute and ruled that Republican Wyman had won, but just by 2 votes now. The governor canceled Durkin's certificate and awarded a new credential to Wyman. What a headache for the Senate. As a last option, Durkin petitioned the Senate with its 60-vote Democratic majority, but remember this was in 1975, and wow, this has got a lot of implications to it. At the time that he petitions the Senate, the Senate has a 60-vote Democratic majority, but they hadn't yet, at that point, changed the filibuster rules to lower the cloture threshold to 60. At that point, it was still 67. And just pointing that out by way of historical notes. On January 13th, 1975, the day before the new Congress convened, the Senate Committee on Rules and Administration tried unsuccessfully to resolve the matter. Composed of 5 Democrats and 3 Republicans, the Rules Committee deadlocked 4-4 on a proposal to seat Wyman pending further review. Can you imagine the pressure that must have come down on that 5th Democrat? Alabama Democrat, and there's your answer for you. James Allen voted with the Republicans on grounds that Wyman had presented proper credentials. So even at that point, Alabama Democrats were Republicans. The full Senate took up the case on January 14th with Wyman and Durkin seated at separate tables at the rear of the chamber. Soon the matter returned to the Rules Committee, which created a special staff panel to examine 3,500 questionable ballots that had been shipped to Washington. That's how seriously they took their prerogative. They said, send those ballots to us. We're going to examine them here in the Senate. Amazing, really. Meanwhile, what is also amazing is this is going on at the same time that reformers in the Senate are working the procedure to execute the original nuclear/constitutional option to change the filibuster threshold from 67 down to 60, where they actually are sitting. If you ever wondered about, well, why did they go to 60? 60 is a nice round number. 3/5 makes a certain amount of sense. If you're not going to do 2/3 and you're not going to do 1/2, 3/5 sitting right there in the middle. It just so happens that there are 60 Democrats in this particular Senate, though, wink, wink. That really never came up in the discussion prior to today, did it? How fascinating is that? And how fascinating is it that it's really quite amazing considering that there are Alabama and other, I'm sure, Southern Democrats sitting who are willing to vote with Republicans. Although even then, Republicans were considerably more liberal and progressive than today's Republicans, certainly. There was a lot of voting across the aisles back in those days. But there was increasing political polarization thanks to Watergate. And in the midst of all of this, a filibuster reform proposal takes shape and wins. And that's really kind of astonishing. And especially given the fact that you're now saying there's a disputed Senate seat that only the Senate itself can decide at this point who to seat here, given the intractable problems that they're having settling the issue in New Hampshire. Although, and another point to bring up here is a very clear example of federal, I guess you would have to call it sort of a federal supremacy in the way of determining the results, not the method of conducting the election, but determining the results. And maybe that's the check and balance and more of the genius of the system coming to light. Yes, even for federal elections, state law controls, but that's okay because ultimately, if for whatever reason we either don't trust the state or the state can't get it done, when you're talking about an election for the Senate or the House, there are existing bodies that are the ultimate arbiters of who will constitute their membership, and they can make decisions. We don't have that, to get back to the problem being outlined with the 538 article, for the presidency. There's no national body to whom that falls outside of the Electoral College. But if the question being considered is essentially, were the members of the Electoral College fraudulently elected, then we're out of luck. And that is the question we were facing at the end of the last election. It wasn't necessarily, we keep focusing on the collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, and that's where the malfeasance, if any, I'm sure was seated. But the ultimate result of it wasn't that, technically speaking, it wasn't that Donald Trump was elected president. It's that a fraudulently constituted, if you believe that this was the case, then it was a fraudulently constituted electoral college that made the decision to ratify the installment of Donald Trump in the presidency. And although hardly anybody, I would assume, thinks that there was collusion between the members of the Electoral College and Russia, that's just one of the peculiarities of our system. We end up with these people. And remember, a lot of times these slates are put together in consultation with the candidates themselves. But I doubt very much that the Electoral College members themselves had any contact whatsoever with any of the election tampering going on. They were just sort of almost like innocent bystanders, except for the fact that they're the ultimate arbiters of what to do about the race. Now, that only makes the situation more complicated. Back to the Senate race of 1974. I'm just curious about this now. Following the review, the Rules Committee sent 35, they eliminated, it's down to 1% of it, 3,500 questionable ballots, 35 of them I'm sorry. I don't know if it's ballots. They said they sent 35 disputed points to the full Senate. I guess questions that needed resolving by the full Senate, which spent the next 6 weeks debating the issue. Imagine that. I mean, that's pre-C-SPAN. I don't know if any debate can last that long now, but remember, of course, they wouldn't have any interest in invoking any cloture, but they couldn't have done that. But, again, the background story. We've told the story in the past of how in 1975 there was this protracted battle and how they stretched out the opening of the Congress, the opening day and the settlement of the rules, and stretched it out into this enormous months-long procedure so that they could ultimately execute the nuclear/constitutional option. Remember back in the days where we were trying, at least, to make it conform to this 1975 precedent that this was doable on the opening day of a Congress, or the very beginning of a new Congress, because the rules hadn't technically been set yet. And then we found out later on in the process, and we always knew it was the case, but we found out that they were willing to use the ability to change the rules at any time with a simple majority vote to separate the rules change procedure from the notion that there was some magical moment at the beginning of a new legislature. But if you ever were wondering about the 1975 case and just said, well, maybe it's just that we just don't do these things this way anymore. Maybe it has to do with C-SPAN. I don't know. But I can't imagine the current Senate leadership of either party tolerating a procedural fight stretching from January into March. What an amazing event it must have been to have this filibuster reform fight occupying the floor of the Senate and the minds of all the senators for so long. Amazing that they could keep that much attention on it. And I now learn that at the same time, they were also dealing with with a protracted debate about what to do about seating a senator from New Hampshire. So they were already in the business of delaying all regular legislative business and dealing with procedural issues and constitutional minutia. So I guess it was no further distraction to also be considering the filibuster reform proposal for months on end at the same time. Amazing. Part of history I was unaware of, even though I had studied that same period in the same body. So, what was going on here? They had the 35 disputed points. They spent 6 weeks debating the issue and took an unprecedented 6 cloture votes. And why couldn't they get cloture on these things? And the answer is because at the time, the cloture threshold was still 67. But by the end of this period of dispute, they have decided, A, to seat a New Hampshire, or I guess to have the election over again. Is that what they ended up doing? They decided what to do about seating a New Hampshire senator and changed the filibuster rule as a result of all this. And I wonder remember that in the story of how they changed the filibuster, this was an annual exercise for some years and they just kept hitting a wall. I wonder if it was this disputed election that gave people the time to really hash the filibuster question out and finally resulted in implementing some reform. Amazing. All right. So facing this deadlock, they had the unprecedented 6 cloture votes, but resolved only one of the 35 points in dispute. Clearly another indication that clearly we need to do something about this filibuster. We're dying here. There's 6 cloture rules and only one of the 35 points gets settled. Facing this deadlock, Durkin, the Democratic candidate, agreed to Wyman's proposal for a new election. The Senate declared the seat vacant, and the governor appointed former Senator Norris Cotton to hold the seat for 6 weeks until the September 16th balloting. Wow. 6 weeks until September 16th? How long did that go on? A record-breaking turnout gave the election to Durkin by a 27,000 vote margin. The real winners, however, may have been the Senate's Republicans, for years a dispirited and hopeless minority. This contest unified their ranks and, as some believed, gave them invaluable tactical experience in dealing with an overwhelming Democratic majority. That's a very interesting conclusion to all of that, too. And now we have to think about that. And by the way, there's been disputed elections in the House that are settled similarly. And for a long time, Newt Gingrich, who we usually point to as the origin of hyper partisanship on the federal level and certainly inside of Congress, he always pointed to the what he believed was unfair settlement of the, I think it was Indiana's 8th district, that for years was one of the closest elections in the country and produced disputed results more than once. And I think it was Newt Gingrich, we asked, where was Newt Gingrich radicalized? He'll tell you that it was in the Democratic House majorities, what he viewed to be their naked use of their majority to simply say, screw it, in a disputed election, the Democrat wins, period. No matter what the evidence, we want another vote. And he felt that was, anybody would think that was unfair. I don't know if that's a fair interpretation of what actually happened, but it was his. And based on that, he began his long, hyper-partisan crusade. And I wonder whether this likewise colored his view of these things, or at least it colored the view of potential hyper-partisans in the Senate who would become his allies. Very interesting, amazing. And we still haven't gotten through the 538 article. Where did we leave off? We were looking at these links. So we had just said that the framers gave the Electoral College broad discretion to resolve the disputes as it saw fit with the presidential election. The text of the Constitution pretty much says an election is legit when the Electoral College says it is. That's, again, insofar as the presidential race is concerned. It doesn't lay out a process for do-overs. However, occasionally courts have ordered new elections for offices other than the presidency after a proven case of fraud or error. Error right here in this sentence is that was the case we just went through was the example for error. And it was in a sentence that said courts have ordered new elections when they find such fraud or error. And no, courts didn't order that new election. The parties to the election agreed to it as part of this Senate's adjudication of the question. But okay. We'll forgive that. Then there was also, of course, the North Carolina gerrymandering case, but we haven't seen that one come, as I said, to fruition yet. And the Senate election, oh no, that was right. Maybe it was the court, the error one was the Connecticut case, and it was in fact. So sorry, apologies to our 538 Raider. You had it right. The courts did deal with those. Then, of course, there's the Senate election redone in New Hampshire because it was too close to determine even with multiple recounts. Okay, I think we're back on track. I've confused things terribly now. But whether this kind of redo is allowed for a presidential election is a more complicated matter. Believe it or not, it's more complicated than what I just told you. Some legal scholars maintain that the language in Article 2 of the Constitution prevents holding a presidential election again, thus putting it beyond the power of the courts to order a revote, no matter what, I guess, as they have occasionally done for other offices. I guess we ought to take a look at this. What legal scholar is it, or some legal scholars that they've pointed to here? Let's see. They're pointing to a Law News article, and we've hit Law News before. Mostly for stuff about Donald Trump being a lech, actually. This by a writer by the name of Chris White, who says, sorry, but alleged Russian influence in presidential election won't lead to a do-over. This is from back in December of 2016. And sounds even actually kind of familiar. And it may be that in fact we've read or referenced this before. And my impulse is to read why he says that, but let's just accept for the moment that at least one legal scholar does say that he says there's a textual reason in Article 2 for disallowing courts from ordering a new election, even if there was proven Russian interference. We'll check into that later. Others suggest there is a legal precedent for a presidential revote if there were flaws in the process. And again, just by way of reference, we are talking about a George Mason Law Review. Interestingly enough, George Mason Law Review article of 2011. Wow. Entitled, and this will bring the election in question immediately to mind, Right Without Remedy, the Butterfly Ballot Case and Court-Ordered Federal Election Revotes. Interesting. So we've been there before in recent memory. One instance in which this question arose was the butterfly ballot, as they're pointing out, from the 2000 election, which may have caused some voters to choose Pat Buchanan when they meant to vote for Al Gore in Palm Beach County, Florida. If the 2000 election had taken some different twists and turns, the revote question might have come up in a serious way, and it's not clear what the courts would have decided. At least one federal court has suggested that the courts could order a new election. In 1976, a district court in New York heard a case alleging voter fraud in several urban locations. What? Wait a minute. Voter fraud in several urban locations? Surely that's got to be of some interest to today's Republicans and Chris Kobach. I bet didn't. Well, what's the case, by the way? Well, it's linked. I'll allow you to look it up. I can't get distracted this many times. So, the court's opinion in that case, whatever it may have been, maintained that federal courts had a role to play in ensuring free and fair presidential elections. Sure. Arguing, quote, it is difficult to imagine a more damaging blow to public confidence in the electoral process than the election of a president whose margin of victory was provided by fraudulent registration or voting, ballot stuffing, or other illegal means. True. And probably at this point, if you just say that, Republicans will agree with you. This assertion challenged the idea that the presidential elections occupy a special category beyond such court remedies. However, in this case, the court didn't find sufficient evidence that voter fraud had altered the outcome or even occurred at all. Not surprising to those of us who follow the issue today. As a result, its claims about presidential elections were not evaluated by higher courts and have never really been tested. So, experts disagree about whether courts can order presidential elections to be held again. That's not great news for angry people hoping for a do-over. And even if it is constitutionally permissible, there's much broader agreement that the standard for invalidating an election result and holding another vote is quite high. University of Memphis law professor Stephen Mulroy, whose name, as I recall, is on that George Mason University law review article. Stephen Mulroy told me, the writer at 538, that courts will usually entertain this option only if they determine a violation of rules that would change the election outcome. In the case of the 2016 election, this would likely require proving tampering in several states where the vote was close, enough to change the result in the Electoral College. In that case, a few states would vote again, not the entire country, Mulroy said. But this is new territory, and no one knows for sure. It's worth noting that the U.S. has been through a number of challenging presidential elections. The 1800 election ended in an Electoral College tie, and some politicians mulled over the possibility of holding a new election. Critics alleged that the 1824 election was decided through a corrupt bargain among elites, allowing John Quincy Adams to become president, even though he won neither the popular vote nor the electoral vote. I don't think we take enough note of that. The election of 1876 had irregularities, including alleged vote suppression in several southern states, and an imbalanced commission ended up handing the Electoral College vote to Rutherford B. Hayes, even though he had lost the popular vote. People are still debating John F. Kennedy's razor-thin margin in 1960. the honesty of the votes in Texas and Illinois that year, and even Richard Nixon's decision not to challenge the results. And of course, the 2000 election presented lots of problems: confusing ballots, hanging chads, questions about recounts. Each of these instances was different from the questions hanging over 2016, but they offer some context for how our system handles questions of electoral legitimacy. Sometimes these questions seriously undermine a presidency, as it did with John Quincy Adams and, to a lesser extent, Hayes, who had already promised to serve only one term. Other times the noise fades from the public conversation and governing proceeds, fulfilling the constitutional goal of stability rather than months of, or more, of electoral disputes. In most of the historical cases, the main question was how the Electoral College votes would be allocated in each state. Once those have been cast, the case for questioning a presidential election or gauging which side really won becomes a lot more difficult. Of course, the Constitution does have one mechanism for undoing the results of an election: impeachment. That process, however, is focused on individual wrongdoing, or through a separate process, inability, not electoral irregularities. Although, again, we remind you that the impeachment is what the House says it is. This House is not going to say it's that, but another House might. In that sense, even if collusion revelations did lead to Trump's impeachment and removal from office, the process wouldn't really address the question of whether his election had been legitimate in the first place. And in fact, I guess you could argue that it closes the books on the legitimacy of the election by impeaching him. There's only one, you can only be impeached if you're a federal official. So if he's impeached and removed from office, I guess in a way that's a tacit admission that for legal purposes anyway, we're willing to accept the legitimacy of his election. How ironic would it be then? I wonder if that could be used as an argument against, some people would probably lean on it as a crutch, right? An argument against impeachment, whether you're voting in the House or the Senate. I guess if you could argue, if you really think that he should be removed from office because he was placed there illegitimately, by impeaching him, you're legitimizing him. And it's very tricky. You'd have to be a special kind of weird to be interested in entertaining that argument. Because at that point, right now, at that point, you'd just be saying, listen, I'm interested in the practical outcome and nothing else. I can appreciate the irony, but it's not a joke writing session. It's a getting rid of this idiot president session, and I'm willing to put up with it. Okay, fine. He's legitimately elected for the purpose of kicking him out. You bet. You got it. It's a great compromise. See, we all have come to agreement in the end. How interesting that might be. All right. The lack, though, of an established process for reviewing elections points to a larger issue. The structures established by the Constitution assumed a world in which the presidency and the Electoral College were not fully absorbed into a contentious national party system. That vision has long since been replaced by one in which presidential elections are national contests over policy agendas and ideas. Sort of. The text of our Constitution has never been changed to reflect this reality. Instead, the Electoral College remains the final word on who gets to be president. When it comes to the possibility that the winning side colluded with a foreign power to influence the election outcome, the Constitution doesn't offer much in the way of a plan. That's a hard stop to that interesting article. Julia Azari, by the way, an associate professor of political science at Marquette University. Her research interests include the American presidency, political parties, and political rhetoric. She's the author of Delivering the People's Message, The Changing Politics of the Presidential Mandate. Thank you very much. Very interesting. And you can follow her, by the way, on Twitter, Julia_Azari, A-Z-A-R-I. If you found this piece that compelling, I suggest you do it. Interesting, though, diversion from the rest of the news, the directions we could have gone, and the directions most likely the rest of the broadcast world has gone. That's what makes our show so interesting and special. We got one article deep in pocket today. Okay, let's see. Where else might we go in the closing minutes? I'll give you a sampler, but I'll make the decision because I have no time to solicit your opinion on these things. So let's see. We got, you know what? Then if I say all these things, I feel like I got to include them in the roundup. Do we want to do all this? I'll say this. More distressing news about Kaspersky Labs and their ties to the Russian government too. And it's, I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion I'm just going to have to sink all the money that I spent, over the years on Kaspersky as antivirus protection. They're actually, I thought, one of the most effective antivirus protection programs I've had on the computer. I've tried the other ones and they're all more or less horrible. But Kaspersky, came recommended if you buy your computers at Best Buy, and I'm not saying that's a great place to buy it or anything, but if you like the convenience of it, fine. They tend to recommend Kaspersky. I wonder if there's something weird going on there. But anyway, I can't shake the feeling, because apparently the federal government investigators can't shake it either, that Kaspersky might be a huge unforeseen problem that we just adapted we just got used to the idea. Sure, they're based in Russia, but they're just building antivirus software. How bad could that be? And let's put it on all our government computers, and then we find out that actually they're trying to meddle in our elections and totally undermine the democratic underpinnings of the United States of America. Now we realize, maybe it probably was not a great idea to have them, basically to have handed them the keys to all our computers. That's the question they're after. And I'm not certain that they've gotten to that point, but it's making me nervous. And I'm sure there's no national secrets on my computer, but, I don't want to help. You know what I mean? I don't want to prop this stuff up. Okay. Let's see. One last thing we'll throw in here, just to try and cram in one more story that you might not have heard the news of yet. ProPublica. Now, they rarely write their stories to a length that makes it easy to fit it into 7 or 8 minutes, but I think this one's not terribly overlong. Thought I'd throw it in there just for the additional point in the value of the additional point on our plot and connecting all the dots on Donald Trump and his financial shenanigans and various aspects of financial crimes that might be part of the collusion or otherwise under the umbrella of the Mueller investigation. Here's what ProPublica has for us today. Derek Kravitz and Cesare Podkul, both from ProPublica, and Will Parker at The Real Deal, teaming up on this one. You know how ProPublica does its partnerships. Here's how Trump transferred wealth to his son while avoiding the usual taxes. This is kind of interesting. Donald Trump sold 2 condos to Eric in April of 2016 at a steep discount, but he doesn't appear to be on the hook for gift taxes. It seems like small bore stuff, but there's at least one eyebrow-raising paragraph in here. In April 2016, as Donald Trump was on the cusp of clinching the Republican nomination for the White House, he sold 2 luxury condos near Manhattan's Central Park for less than half the price his company had said they were worth. The lucky buyer? Trump's son, Eric. Well, okay. Like, is that really super troubling? He's going to sell condos to his son, Eric. Fine. That's all well and good. Although, what's Eric need with 2 condos near Central Park? I mean, surely he's got a fabulous condo somewhere already. What does he need these other condos for? He's not going to live there himself. Well, that becomes sort of important. But also what's interesting is, okay, and so fine, he's going to sell them to Eric. And of course he's going to sell them at a steep discount. It's his son, right? It's a miracle that he's selling it at all. He could just give it to him. But what else is interesting? Remember what we read the other day? That all of a sudden, at the point at which it becomes clear that Trump gets the nomination and then later on it will be elected president, allegedly, all of a sudden it skyrockets the number of pieces of real estate that his companies are selling to LLCs blindly, and you can't tell who owns the things. Well, okay, well, this is different, right? He's selling to Eric Trump. But as it turns out, he's not selling to Eric Trump. He's selling to limited liability corporations controlled by Eric Trump. Why that extra layer of difficulty? Well, maybe this will explain it to us. Such family-friendly deals would normally incur, though, this is another big problem, hundreds of thousands of dollars in gift taxes. Yes, it's the sort of thing that people do for their family all the time, but there's a tax price to it. Ordinarily, but not for these guys. In this case, Trump appears unlikely to have been on the hook for anywhere near those hundreds of thousands of dollars in gift taxes, thanks to benefits available only to real estate developers. Remember how we were speculating early on in the presidency about how often he was visiting his properties, and he might really be trying to claim that he's still a real estate professional in addition to being president? Well, Eric certainly is. Anyway, Eric Trump bought the 2 condos on the top floors of the Trump Park East building. It's a Trump building at 100 Central Park South for $350,000 each. The Trump Organization filings show that as of February 2016, 2 months before this deal, the condos were priced at $790,000 and $800,000. Similar one-bedroom condos on a lower floor in the same building sold for $690,000 in 2014. So the transactions illustrate the unique advantages that real estate developers like Trump have when passing down valuable assets between generations. Not everyone has the opportunity to avoid gift taxes, just developers with developer units. Remember, this is a Trump building, and he withholds certain units from the market and says, I own these. And in the process of, quote-unquote, divesting himself and avoiding conflicts of interest, etc., or, moving things off of his books, he moves them onto Eric's books instead and makes them, they're still developer units, but he has to dump them. He needs some cash from these things. I just think this is interesting. So this is according to Beth Shapiro Kaufman, a estate planning attorney and president at Kaplan and Drysdale in Washington, D.C. The biggest game in gift taxes is valuation issues. Anyway, it's a very interesting article, and it goes on to explain exactly what happened here. We obviously will no longer have time for discussing that, but just very interesting that even on the level of a couple $1,000s worth of gift taxes, he's gaming the system in order to avoid paying them, gaming the system in order to guarantee that Eric avoids paying them, and still playing the LLC game. Why is it that he can't simply hand the thing over to Eric? Because then Eric is on the hook for those taxes. But if it's an LLC, well, maybe that's a different story. But in addition to which, special tax breaks for real estate developers make the bill even lower. Just amazing how many of these things, how he can play such complicated games and still not be able to find his way into his own limousine when it's directly in front of him. I have big questions about his competency for the office and who's running things even in the organization at this point. Anyway, it's time to hand things over to the guys on the after show. We've had lots of fun KITM style distractions to take us away from the rest of the news, but thankfully they'll be here to bat clean up, and of course it's Thursday. That means thank God it's Jovidi time. California and New Mexico sue over Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke's latest illegal gift to the oil and gas industry. We'll find out what that is. The D.C. Court of Appeals rules EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt can't just illegally suspend the agency's methane rule. Gee whiz. And Thomas Jefferson called the Declaration of Independence a scientific paper. Maybe that's why Trump and his supporters hate it so much. On the last half, let's see, a report that the mayor of Miami and the Miami-Dade jail are both sued for the flawed and illegal holding of a U.S. citizen for deportation to Honduras. That and much, much more coming up on the after show. Right
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
One more remarkable story coming up on the last half. Oregon Republicans bucking their party's extremists by voting to spend $36 million on health care for undocumented children. There's hope, I guess, for justice in the world after all. We'll find out whether they have any evil motivations behind that next when we talk with Wink and Justice. We'll be back tomorrow.